Hello, this is a progress update on the state of the BrainAnnex open source project, which is currently in version beta 30.1 of its completely overhauled version 5. I'll refer you to the version and change log page for details. The project has a long history that goes back to 2015 and beyond. Previous videos elaborate on this. But here I'll emphasize that originally the project was a web app for multimedia content management, but in 2020 it was overhauled and turned into a modular technology stack based on graph databases, and in particular Neo4j. At that point, the original purpose of multimedia content management is now just one of many possible uses. It's just one use case, but one that is included in its standard distribution, and one that this video is about. Let's log in. Here we're using the web app module of the BrainAnnex software stack. There are a number of different parts to the web app. One of them is a series of control panels under the admin tab. There's also a bit of navigation available. This particular video focuses on the web app, once again with the understanding that this is only one module. So here in the admin section, there's a number of fairly general features that have been implemented so far. The project is what could be described as a late beta stage, with the exception of the lowest library, the one that interfaces between Python and the Neo4j database. Quick walk through some of the features, like an option to create a dump of the entire database as a JSON file, or to re-import it from the same format. And then there is a schema manager that allows using the user interface to create and modify the schema information. There's an article about schemas. I'll post a link to that article I wrote. There's a function to export that schema, not the actual data, but the schema as a JSON file. I won't talk in great detail about any function. I just want to give this update and have a quick walkthrough. There is also some data import features. For example, to import JSON file, to import a series of JSON files, and then a feature to import a Python file and turn it into a web page to document it. An example of that is in the BrainAnnex.org documentation. Here, let me change tabs, and I'm now looking at the reference guide for that particular library, New Access. This is inside the BrainAnnex.org site, and this entire, almost all of this page is automatically generated from importing and parsing the Python file. Some additional work will be done on the table of contents to make it look better and stay fixed in position. This may be a good time to quickly review the overall diagram of the technology stack. That was discussed at length in a previous video, so I won't repeat it here other than just point at the broad elements, namely the Neo4j database, and then some libraries which are of general use, and then a data manager layer that invokes those libraries and provides whatever data is needed by either the API, the web API part, or by Flask page templates to generate pages dynamically. And then those pages contain dynamic elements using the Vue.js front end. You can build your own application or your own web API endpoint or whatever else you need for your use case by taking whatever parts you need from the technology stack and then using them and adapting them to your need. So continuing the quick tour here, that's the admin part, the series of control panels. This will continue to be expanded with time, and it's fairly general. There's a number of experimental features. I won't talk about them. Mostly I'll be talking about the category viewer. This is a user interface built on top of a data structure that looks as follows. This tab, where I have the Neo4j browser open, and I already laid out some of the data that I created earlier. And this data is about entities that I call categories, and the category represents a group of content items of various types. I'll say more about what they are, that logically belong together because they're in the same topic. So here each of the purple nodes is a category, and at first, starting with the home category there, basically the root, and it may look like it's a tree the way a table contents in a book, for example, would be a tree, but this is actually not the tree structure. It's a directed graph, and it's acyclic directed graph. For example, here if we look at this category biology datasets, it is attached with a subcategory of relationship to both biology as well as databases. And biology is here represented as a subcategory of science, which is a subcategory of this example category I created, whereas database is also a subcategory of that, and Neo4j is a subcategory of that as well, and Cypher, which is the programming language for Neo4j, is a subcategory of Neo4j, and so on. So we'll be looking at some of this category with a user interface viewer in just a moment. These categories are entities which have just a few attributes, primarily a name. The primary element of the categories is the relationship they have with each other, being a subcategory of. Also, there's a second relationship I'm not showing here, not yet implemented in the new version of BrainAnnex, that is called see also, for something that is closely linked to another category, but it's not strictly speaking a subcategory of. And then if I take any category like English, double click on it, I get a lot of connections, and these are individual data items that are attached to that category. We'll be looking at them. So here we can do that navigation in a way that resembles navigating through a book. I'm looking at going to that examples by Julian category, and we can look at category theory, which is a branch of maths, nothing to do with the categories we've been talking about. And here's a good example of some of those content item I was talking about earlier. Content item is any entity that has some data attached to it and that is linked to a particular category. So the category here is this entity called category theory, that's the name, and it's a branch of mathematics. And the individual items, content items, are things like this is a header, as well as bookmarks, which are links to websites, and those are two examples, as well as images, as well as formatted text, as well as documents such as a PDF here that can open and look at on a separate tab. There is a editing mode for the entire page. This is new in this version. So now the various items are editable. So I can edit, for example, the formatted text. There's a built-in formatted text editor that's from open source project, CK edit. And let me leave the editing mode. This is being partially implemented, but some of the content items, you can just double click on them and enter the editing mode. So here we're looking at editing a bookmark, or site link is another name for it, which is basically a record with 6 fields. Here nothing too special about it, but by declaring it in the schema, and I'll talk about it in a moment, that this record is not just a generic record, but it's a record of a particular type. That is what the user interface looks at, and then checks if this particular type of entity, the one called the bookmarks or site link, has any software attached to it. And it turns out, yes, it does. It has some software in the front end, a view component, view being the front end, that instead of displaying this as an ordinary record like you would see in a spreadsheet, it's laid out in a way that may be more suited for your use case or the way you want it to see as well. It could be edited in a particular way here. Let's look at some other categories. The examples I'm showing you are actual examples from my own personal notes. It's a teeny subset. I have over 1,000 categories in my own notes and far more items, but I just copied over a few to give you a sense of someone, myself in this case, using them as a personal knowledge management system. A couple of quick examples. This is an online course on oceanography I took some time ago, and it's formatted text notes as well as images. Things like adding annotations to images or changing their title and so on. A few of these features are not implemented yet in the new version of BrainAnnex, but in the old one you could add notes to images that will be upcoming feature here. If we look at language, so let's, I mean, I can go directly here, but let's navigate through the graph. This is not the tree, remember, it's a graph. So let's go to examples, and then let's go to language. Here I have a few image, a bookmark, and then some notes about various languages. So in French, for example, besides the book notes and images and documents, there is also records. And these are records of a particular type that was declared in the schema. If I switch to editing mode, here the editor knows about predefined records, in this case for the French vocabulary, and he knows that those are the predefined fields. How does he know? He knows because it was defined in the admin control panel under the schema manager. And this is what it looks like. Let me scroll down here to the schema visualization. There's a cipher query that I can copy and run. This is only temporary. Down the line, the graph will appear here as part of the app. I'll have more to say about it. But for now, let me follow the instructions here to copy, and then let me go to the tab with the Neo4j browser. This is the built-in browser that comes with the Neo4j database distribution. These are the various types of labels. So let's run that query. And this is looking at all the schema part of the database. So there it is. Let's take a closer look. There is a node whose label is class. This represents a class which is similar to a table. And foreign vocabulary is an instance of it. French vocabulary, which we were looking at before. French vocabulary is a property, and that's the French version of the word. What about the English version? Well, the English version, as well as notes, are the same for every language. There's always an English in the notes in this particular type of data modeling we have here. So those properties sit with the parent, the foreign vocabulary, of which French vocabulary is an instance of, a special relationship instance of which the user interface knows about, as well as the schema layer, one of these foundational libraries I talked about before. So the user interface reads in through that schema layer library, reads in this declaration of the schema, which can be done also through the user interface, and then it finds we're looking at records which are attached to this particular class of French vocabulary, and so it looks at the property of this class as well as properties of any class that this class is an instance of. So the English version, the notes. All said and done, the three records that appear here. The point I want to make here is that these fields are not hardwired in the user interface at all. The user interface queries the backend through a web API call, asks what kind of fields should we include, for example, in when adding a new record, and then it receives a list of those fields. Okay, here in the schema I navigated to content item, and we see that headers as well as media such as documents, notes, and images are all instance of content item. So content item is a general entity. Is it hard to add additional types of content items? The answer is no, because the core of the web app and the libraries, the entire stack of libraries provide a lot to the functionality. So in fact, there's an article will be coming up soon that talks about the implementation of, let's go under brain anatomy, the implementation of documents as a type of content item, and it was fairly easy to do. In the absence of dedicated software to show the content item in a special way, this metadata about the content item would be a generic record. So basically you can think of it as a plugin system where you can just declare new types and provide some software primarily for front-end components, and sometimes a little bit of Python code to deal with some operations. But a lot of the basic functionality is done by the core. Whenever there is a formatted text entered as an item, it automatically gets parsed into individual words, and those get stored in an index. I'll put a link in the description. And so all the text nodes right now are being indexed. So for example, if we look up this word here and then we search for it, it indeed locates that node that contain that word. The automatic highlighting will be added to future versions. PDF documents are currently not indexed in this version, but that's going to change very soon. Let's go back to the category viewer. I'll quickly point a couple of practical operations that one can do. Here you can unlock the editing mode, and then you can reposition items, move them around. You can delete them. You can edit some of them. You can drag and drop files, both images and documents, here to the page. And then if you want to create a new subcategory here, you can do here at the bottom of the page. So now if we scroll up, that test category, which will be the subcategory of whatever category we were on, will be created, and it will appear here as right now a blank category that doesn't have content items added to them. And one way to edit the whole category is clicking on this pencil. This will be streamlined in future versions. This is a partial port of features that existed in the old version. Let me edit test to my test. And this is a child of the home category, which is the root. You can also make it a subcategory of biology, for example. So here we visit this page. So now we're in that my test page, and here it shows the pedigree as being a subcategory of both biology and the home page. And if I want to get rid of it, as long as there's no items attached to it, I can just delete it and then go back. And now that test is gone. Let's look at the fun category, namely dining. Here I have some records of a few types. One is a restaurant entity, one is a cuisine type. We have 2 records there. One is locations, 2 records, and the last one is entrees. And these are shown right now as individual records, but actually they're interlinked. We can see it with this experimental feature on the user interface that will gradually be rolled in as something more prevalently used. So I switched to page editing mode, even though I'm not editing, but just that's the way it works at the moment. And here if I click under links for this Mr. Pizza, this is not a real name, but it's showing that all the links to this particular node, namely there are 3 inbound links which are about being served at. So if I click on that, these are entities which are entrees, which are served at this Mr. Pizza place, mushroom pie and so on. I can look at this outbound link. This is located in, so this will be outbound link from the pizza restaurant to a location here in New York. And then cuisine type, this is an outbound link from the pizza restaurant to a type of cuisine, namely pizza. In future version of BrainAnnex, this will most likely be a counterpart of navigating through linked data currently being done in the Neo4j browser that comes with the Neo4j product. Here we can locate that restaurant. Under restaurants here, the label, there's a Mr. Pizza, and we can see in a different form that Mr. Pizza is several items, entrees served at in blue, that it is located in New York, and the cuisine type is pizza, and also it is in category dining, dining being the name of that page. This is what permits this item to automatically appear when the page is populated. And then the schema, that's the secret sauce here that makes this record here, which normally would be just a record with some fields, into something that is or can be treated differently by the user interface. One vision for future versions of BrainAnnex that should be coming up relatively soon is a dual modality of being able to see data in this form as well as in a form where you can navigate from record to record. There is an advantage to both. This is more oriented to see the relationships, and it's harder to see the records. You can really look at one record at a time, whereas this modality here is oriented for best showing the records, and then you can look at the relationships basically a few at a time. So this is probably best suited for record field heavy viewing, whereas this may be best for relationship heavy modality of viewing. So do we always have to leave the web app to go on a separate browser to the Neo4j browser app? The answer is no. And what comes to the rescue is an open source library. Here I'm showing it on a separate tab. This open source library is called Cytoscape. Cytoscape is an organization that's been around for quite a few years that focuses on systems biology, where representing networks is of great importance. And they created a variety of software to support that mission, in particular a JavaScript library that provides a lot of the same functionality that one sees in the Neo4j browser app. So now we can have nodes, we can move around, we can have relationships, and we can move everything around, and then when we click on an item, its attributes get shown. So that's not too different from what we have here. Some functionality is still not present, but this will be incorporated into the BrainAnnex app. The heavy lifting has been done by this library, by the Cytoscape organization, and what you're seeing here is just a thin layer built on top of this app to provide some extra functionality, and it's done using, once again, the Vue.js front end. And right now this is part of another open source project called life123.science that I lead, but it will cross over into being part of BrainAnnex in a not too distant future. One will be able to switch the viewing modality from navigating through records, kind of horizontal rectangular records that one typically would use in a spreadsheet or something similar, to the alternate view where the emphasis is more on the relationships than the contents of the individual records, and quickly and easy switch between the two. So that's where things are at, and check out the version and change log. I'll put the link in for the newest updates.